publisher's retail price of $6.50 each. You don't have to keep even one, but decide later. Right now, send for these 3 Disney favorites for just $2. And for a free chair that's just right for a person who's about to love reading, write this mouse's name on your letter.
To get 3 Disney books for just $2 and a free chair, write to Disney Books Offer, Box 1000, 444 Robson Street, or call 685-2055. That's 685-2055. Don't forget to name the famous mouse and get 3 Disney books for just $2.
BCTV, our best showing.
Good morning. Mother Corporation, the CBC, is under attack. But then again, it is always under attack. Now it faces 20, 50, 100 satellites in competition. It faces all kind of cable. It faces first choice. It faces taxpayers' parsimoniousness. And it faces allegations of feather bedding. And the man in charge of it, pity help him, is a man who has done almost everything in culture in Canada. He's been head of the CRTC, he's been a cabinet minister, he's been a deputy minister, he's been in charge of the National Film Board, and he is now the man who can tell us this morning whether or not the CBC can survive. Pierre Juneau, president of the corporation. Now, for a little bit of bad news this morning, we've got Gord Thomson, who's the head man in Esso Petroleum products. He can maybe tell us why, while the international world prices are collapsing for barrels of oil, the price of gasoline keeps going up. And so that you know a little bit about international affairs on this normally parochial show, we've got Leonard Schroeter from Seattle, who's an expert on dissent in the Soviet Union. Also this morning, we're going to bring you a bulletin, we think, on the sad, sad case of little Stephen Dawson, because this is the morning when Judge Patsy Byrne of Burnaby Family Court is scheduled to make the very difficult decision as to whether Stephen, who's about 7, the son of Mr. and Mrs. Sharon and Robert Dawson, she decides whether or not the parents' wishes that he die peacefully be accepted, or whether the boy is put back into the hands of the Ministry of Human Resources for yet another operation in his very fragile and unhappy condition. But first this morning, Pierre Juneau, president of the corporation, after the break. Mr. Juneau, I know the CBC will survive in some form or other, but how difficult is it going to be for the CBC to survive against Fox's new satellite policy, wide open skies, pay TV, cable TV, and financial strictures? Is it a fact that you cannot survive in your present form but must change your way of life to be an effective means of Canadian communication?
I think so. I think we've got to change. I think we've got to be a much stronger, a much more distinct voice in this cacophony of noises coming from all over the place. I think that the CBC's got to be seen as something much more distinct than it is at the moment.
And not fair to ask you programming, but in what way are you going to be more distinct? You've been expert up to now in the nature of things and quarterly report. I'll give you a B+ on the journal. It's coming along. But is it going to be news only, or is it going to be news and public affairs and culture in which you plan to make the corporation distinct?
I think that we're doing pretty well in sports, we're doing very well in news and public affairs, not only in the quality of our programs, but we also attract a very good audience, I think. A program like 50 State gets over 2 million people a week. We are not doing well enough in entertainment, drama, and so on. We have at the moment about 8.5 hours a week of American programs. Now, many of these programs are very good, but they can be seen elsewhere. They can be seen on American networks. They can be seen on Canadian private networks. So we're duplicating what other people are doing. The problem with that, however, is that drama, as you know, is very expensive. So that would be a problem, but we've got to find a way to do it.
What you may be trying to do, therefore, is to copy the efficiency of British Masterpiece Theatre and the American PBS, which on very little amount of money, a matter of $190 million, they can run both a national private radio network, national public radio, and PBS. Why is the CBC so expensive?
Oh, well, just a minute. PBS hardly produce any entertainment. PBS is very good. It is very original in the field of information, for instance, but in the field of drama and entertainment, PBS is really an importer of programs. It gives the Americans a chance. It's the only network in the United States that gives the American a chance of seeing, foreign programs and British programs particularly. So in the area of drama, PBS really buys programs. It doesn't make any.
Just a retailer.
It's a retailer of British programs, which is very good because the Americans wouldn't see those programs otherwise.
Now, one of the first things you did when you came into power was came into power as president, was that you set up an efficiency survey of the CBC. Give me the bad results of that survey, because we all feel that the corporation is feather-bedded and bureaucratized and bossed to death.
Well, I don't think that it's fair to say that it's bossed to death. I think that when there is a bit of slack or a bit of fat in an organization, my experience is that it's at every level. It's at the technical level, it's at the production level, it's at the level of freelance people, and at the level of administration. I don't think that you can say that the only problem is that there's too much administration. Now,
you're telling me there's too much everything?
Well, I think that we've got to, I haven't got a survey. I think it's got to be a continuous thing in the CBC. It's got to be very strong at this moment. We've got to look at how we can save money. I think that I don't intend to go to the government right now and say, please give us more money. I think that we've got to make a big effort, all of us in the CBC, not only me, not only the board of directors, but all the staff of the CBC, to pull ourselves by our own bootstraps for a while, demonstrate that we can administer more effectively, and no doubt if we want to increase our programming, particularly, as I said, drama, it's not a thing that can be done without funds. So I want to demonstrate with the cooperation of all the people in the CBC that we can do a more effective job and hopefully get the confidence of the government, and if we need more resources, get them.
What do you get just now? Just under $1 billion?
That's right, yeah.
But you're not asking for any more?
Well, I don't think we'd get it anyway at the moment if we asked for it.
Now, let's take Applebaum Hebert first. Now, Applebaum Hebert was really quite brutal. It said, more or less, wipe out every kind of production except news and public affairs.
That's right. Not even, they didn't say wipe out. They said that we should discontinue producing ourselves, everything except news. We wouldn't produce public affairs anymore and nothing else. We wouldn't produce sports. We'd only produce news. Everything else would be produced by independent producers.
And what do you say to that radical recommendation?
I say that it can only come from people who don't know how broadcasting works.
They didn't know what they were talking about.
Well, I wouldn't say that about the whole report, but I think in the case of that particular recommendation, I think they don't know how broadcasting works.
What do you feel is essential for the CBC to produce itself, apart from news?
Well, I think that networks in the United States who have gone as far as any networks go in that respect. I mean, they do, all their entertainment is produced outside. They produced all their news, their current affairs, information programs, sports, big events, and so on. The only thing that they don't do is the series we see at night. That's produced by independent producers. I think in the CBC, we should go towards much more cooperation with independent producers, that particularly in the field of drama, we now have good independent producers in Canada, and that we should develop a very close relationship with them and farm out quite a good part of our entertainment production.
Didn't you
we started, mind you.
Didn't you have a strike about that by CBC producers who objected to the farming out of production material to independent producers?
There has always been resistance on the part of the technical unions in the CBC to that sort of thing. You know, as I said, it's something that we would have to work at carefully.
It's a long, slow process.
Well, I wouldn't say long, slow. It's a careful process.
But it's going to be quite soon if you have your way.
We've already started. I think that CBC is now producing very important projects with independent producers.
Do I remember rightly that when you were the chairman of the CRTC, you were very tough on pushing up Canadian content? Question: would you like to see the CBC prime time programming restricted, throwing away these junky American series, restricted entirely to Canadian content between 6 and midnight?
I don't think entirely. I think that the CBC should be a showcase for very good programs from other countries, from the United States, and from Great Britain, for instance, that maybe we're not making a big enough effort in that direction. I just think at the moment, for mainly commercial reasons, because American programs are quite popular. Mind you, we have many Canadian programs that are just as popular as the American ones, but they're easier to sell to advertisers, for one thing, than Canadian programs. Even Canadian programs with just as good ratings are more difficult to sell to advertisers than American programs.
Do you think that commercial revenue should be dropped altogether by the CBC?
No, I don't think so.
Did you not think that at one time?
No, I never thought that. What I said was that the CBC in 1974, when I was in the CRTC, we said, I wasn't alone, we said that the need to get advertising revenue had too much influence on the programs we showed, and that influence should be reduced. And I still think that. Mind you, I don't think that we would be showing 8.5 hours of American programs if it weren't for two reasons. One, it brings in easy advertising revenue, not that easy, but more easily. And second, producing drama is very, very expensive. We buy an American, as this network does, we buy an hour drama, American origin, for something around $35,000, sometimes a little more. A program like that in the United States cost about $800,000 or $1 million to produce. So that's the problem.
Almost too rich for our blood. More with Pierre Juneau, president of the CBC, after the break. Mr. Juneau is president of the CBC, and I got to ask you, are you planning, if any prime minister asks you again for a mini-series spread over 3 nights, would you accept that as a fair and proper proposition?
Well, the rule that was agreed upon between all the parties and the CBC much before I became president, there was an agreement between the 3 parties and the CBC, was that the Prime Minister had, it says literally this, that the Prime Minister has access to the airwaves of the CBC occasionally for messages of national importance. There was nothing in the rule, as I've expressed it, which I thought allowed me to turn down the Prime Minister. And there was automatic response, equal time to the opposition parties. Now, what I did very soon after that happened, I wrote to the 3 parties and said, if you don't like the rules, let's sit down together and develop new rules. And of course, at the moment the parties are a bit busy, one of them particularly with other things, and we haven't been able to do a lot of work on it. But as soon as they are prepared, we'll sit down and work out new rules if they want new rules.
Do they work out the rules, or do you work out the rules? Because
they worked out the rules with the CBC, I think 7 or 8 years ago.
Because it was the three-part series which kind of, the Prime Minister obviously must get time if he says I've got a matter of national importance, but giving it in 3 segments was a bit of a disappointment
Well,
for you, I'm sure.
that certainly caused a bit of a surprise, a bit of commotion in public opinion.
Now about Canadian productions. Mr. Fox was here the other day talking glibly about $35 million for independent productions to buttress Canadian television. But when it costs the Americans $100 million to do a series, what can independent producers do for $35 million that's going to be any kind of real competition to the 20 or 30 choices on cable?
Yeah, well, 2 things. The policy that has been announced says nothing about the CBC. The CBC part of the policy is supposed to come up later. There's no question that if the policy was limited to what has been announced, I don't think that it will be sufficient to solve the problem.
That is merely therefore to private producers in this country to make programs to offer to people to put on television.
That's right. And half of the money is for programs that will be released on networks like this one, private networks, and half of that $35 million is for programs that would be released on the CBC. So it's going to be of some help to us, particularly since it is supposed to to generate twice that amount of money. That is that.
That's right. 2 for 1, I believe it is, right. In fact. What about Fox's rather surprising somersault to the open skies policy, direct broadcasting satellites in '86? And it would seem to be a real kick at the CBC, this open skies satellite policy. More difficult for you than even for us.
Well, I think that the problem is already there. We already get all the 3 big networks in the United States, almost all over the country. So I don't think that, I think that if you get more American stations into Canada, they might compete among themselves even more than they will compete with the CBC or CTV, for instance. It just underlines a problem that we already had, namely that we get more foreign television in this country than, by far, than any other country in the world. So we already have the problem of competition with the Americans. The big question is, will we be doing what it requires to produce good, competitive Canadian programs? And that's very difficult.
More than difficult, is it not almost impossible to get the average English-speaking Canadian to be directed perhaps to a higher quality of programming in the CBC than to look at the Playboy Network or whatever on First Choice?
Well, I don't think that, I think it's difficult. It's mainly a question of money, but it is not that difficult. I think that we've got programs now. You've got Beachcombers here, for instance, produced in BC, which does much better than many American programs. So I think that the proof is there that when the programs are available, people will watch them.
We can survive in news and public affairs, but can any Canadian network or even American network survive under the onslaught of satellite transmission on direct dishes?
Well, that's a big debate. Some people say, and you read articles about that in the U.S. press, that the 3 networks are dead and that everything is going to be so specialized now, split up, and so. I don't believe that. You know, who can tell what's going to happen? But I think that that network broadcasting of the CBC, CTV type, or of the American type is not dead. I think that it's a form of service that is so appealing to the public that it's going to go on for some time.
Am I correct in thinking that the only culture secure in North America is the French-Canadian culture with its own language broadcasts?
Well, I think that the French Canadians are protected by language. But I really felt, you know, I've been dealing for the last, well, I don't know how many years, long time, maybe more with the English side of things than the French side of things, because there's simply more people, more problems. I really think that there's got to be more confidence in what we can do. I think that there are better and better producers, there are better writers, there are better actors. I think we can do it. I think that we can export more also. And I know people are afraid of that idea, because if you export, you've got to tailor your product to the foreign market. But still, I don't think that's entirely true. I think that we are entering a world, we're in it with satellites and so on, where we'll all be talking to each other much more. And I think we've got to start thinking, the CBC must do that, and the private networks must do that. We must start thinking of talking to the Americans sometime, and not only letting them talk to us.
Final question for the benefit of my friends in the broadcasting business. When is your next round of cuts in the CBC?
Well, I think that as long as the economic situation does not improve, we're not likely to get the sort of increases that we need.
Fair enough. Your questions now to Pierre Juneau, President of the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. After the break. You'd think with all your, you've got to put this properly now, you are the president of the CBC, but for a man who was in Cite Libre with Pierre, you might have got a better job than this one.
That's what a lot of people say, that they don't hate me that much.
You've got to be a masochist. Masochist, yes, masochist. Go ahead to Pierre Juneau.
Mr. Juneau, I
Yes.
have a couple of questions. Good morning.
Good morning.
I'd like to question this idea of pulling your bootstraps up. I've been a producer in British Columbia for the last 2 years. I've been producing live performances by musical artists. And for the last 2 years, I've been supplying CBC, radio specifically, programming, because they've been coming in and plugging in and recording the performance and airing it for future broadcast.
What's your question?
My question is the following: is that when you ask about being able to work close in hands with producers, I just finished negotiating a contract for a live performance by an artist, which we turned around and guaranteed it was a $70,000 production. CBC came in following that, and they wanted to record the program, so they turned around and offered the artist an additional $8,000. That's just for performing fees. In many instances, I approached the CBC and I asked them, I said, well, why don't we turn around and organize our efforts? In other words, if you have interest in an artist, then allow me to turn around and negotiate for a live performance, as well as a one broadcasting for the radio. This would allow us to save money on both sides, because I'm certain that if I'm negotiating a $70,000 contract, I'm certain that I may be able, certain to be able to get a recording for $2,500.
Okay, hold on. I think we've got the point. He is saying that there's some clumsy negotiating. I don't even know if that's a valid question for you, but it's something you might want to know.
Sure. I can't comment on that particular thing, because you may be right, or maybe there's a CBC side to the story. But what you're saying illustrates my point. I think that there's got to be more cooperation of that kind, and that people like you can help the CBC sometimes to arrive at better deals. Of course, I can't say whether in this case you're right or the CBC is right.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, I wanted to comment this morning on American films coming into Canada to do filming. Over the weekend, I saw a production called Jane Doe that was filmed right here in Vancouver. Now, if an American company would come in and film here, why wouldn't they acknowledge that it was in Canada? They were mocking all the time that it was supposed to be in Miami, Florida, with our mountains and everything.
That's a compliment to Vancouver, isn't it?
Well, we don't have any riots here anyway.
But it was a beautiful production, but why didn't they acknowledge that it was in Canada?
Well, I'm afraid I've got enough problems with the CBC. I don't have any authority on U.S. producers.
Go ahead, please.
Mr. Juneau, if the CBC is in earnest about cutting some of the fat, dare I hope that proposition will include especially a thorough house cleaning of the fat heads responsible for airing a major insult against the royal family during their visit here, in the form of a very unfunny Australian stand-up comedian that recited smut against Lady Diane.
Do you want any comment on that? Sure, I'll comment on that. I think this was unfortunate, reprehensible, stupid.
And an apology was given.
And there's been a formal apology by the CBC and a very severe reprimand to the people responsible.
Go ahead, please.
Hello, Mr. Juneau.
right?
Yes, good morning.
Yes. First of all, I'd like to compliment the corporation on last evening's broadcast. For the record, I think Mr. Webster's listeners might be interested to know that that production was produced by a Vancouver resident, Mr. Zale Dallin. My question, however, is that when we get into the $17 million, which have been set aside for independent production on the CBC, will the CBC make pre-sale agreements which will hold open for a pay television window? In other words, will they make a pre-sale and hold for another subsequent sale for pay TV, which would precede the CBC airing?
We're doing that now. We have an agreement with C Channel for the production of Balconville, which we're producing jointly with C Channel. We will accept pre-release on pay TV channels, but we would like, not only we would like, but we will insist that it shouldn't always be the pay TV showing first, that there will be some kind of alternance for the first showing between CBC and the pay TV organization. But we've got several projects like that in production now.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, good morning.
Morning.
Okay, I have a question for Mr. Juneau. If the CBC or private independent producers had access to proper funding to make a higher quality dramatic film, not unlike the American films, would not this bring up the ratings and the quality of Canadian films, therefore enticing the advertisers to pay more for prime time slots, and so bringing in more revenue to produce more and yet higher quality films, and not only to the CBC, but to all Canadian affiliates?
The answer is yes. There's only one qualification, in all honesty, that I should mention, is that we can't, in order to increase our sales possibilities in the U.S. or elsewhere, tailor our production strictly for the foreign market. After all, we're supposed to produce films to speak about Canadians and about Canada. Not all the time, but a good part of the time. So that's the only qualification. But besides, apart from that, I completely agree with you.
Go ahead, please.
Oh, good morning.
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 Oh, good morning, gentlemen. In this vale of tears with all the gloom and doom and so on that's going on, are you considering any comedy? I'm quite sure we must have some good Canadian comedians other than the Parliament, the members of Parliament that we see occasionally. We must have. And I'm sure that we need some comedy in our lives.
I think so. I think that when we talk of drama, it's really a broad word that we use to cover the whole area, the whole spectrum of entertainment.
Go ahead, please.
Good morning. I'm asking my question from the consumer's point of view. I wonder if it would be possible for Mr. Juneau, in his wisdom, to get rid of that ghastly thing that's been with the CBC since the beginning, and that is the "look, Mom, I'm being cultural," and the self-conscious attitude. And the other is the local problem that we have. We have a manager who is a very prominent NDP. We get news of every NDP executive meeting and what they're interested in, and then we get giggle, snicker, sneer about anybody who's in opposition. And for one, I would like to see the whole thing sold and Mr. Juneau retired and everybody else too.
Well, I don't know. I don't watch all the programs here. I think that if people like you feel the way you do, you should express your views, and presumably it should help the CBC to be as fair as possible in its presentation of news and other aspects of Canadian reality.
What's your term of appointment, Mr. Juneau? For how long?
7 years.
And you're another 5.5 to go?
6.5.
6.5 to go. One more segment with Pierre Juneau after the break. Go ahead from Nelson, BC, to Pierre Juneau of the CBC.
Yes, good morning.
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 I have a question and also a statement I'd like to make, if that's possible. Anyway, I was curious as to why the CBC doesn't air more Christian religious-type programs on Sunday mornings in the hour between basically 8 and 12 o'clock. The general consensus in this area, in my particular circles, if you will, is that the CBC is fast becoming, or is basically an atheistic, liberal-type institution that's more or less trying to force what would you call a godless culture down the throats of the Canadian citizen, the public in itself. I would like to know, for my satisfaction and a number of people in this area, why there are not more, if you will, religious programs. I prefer to use the word Christian, but if religious is more fitting, why are there not more religious programs on Sunday morning?
Fair question.
Thank you very much. I will hang up and I'll wait for the answer if you don't mind.
I think it's a very fair question. The only thing, I don't know yet, you know, the detailed schedules of CBC well enough to say whether the balance is exactly the right one or not. Let me just point out, though, that I think some of the things you said are exaggerated. I can think of at least 2 programs right off the bat. Man Alive has been on the air for years, and the basis of the program, not every single week in the year, but the basis of the program is a religious base. There's a series of interviews on the French network every week, 1-hour interviews, which are also basically religious. Of course, a bit more familiar with program on the French side. I think we've got Mass on CBC, Catholic Mass on the CBC every week. I'm sure that if I looked at the schedule, I could find a lot of programs. Moreover, we have a religious advisory committee representing all the religions in the country, well, not all of them, but all the main religions in the country, working constantly with the CBC, advising us on our programming.
From 100 Mile House to Pierre Juneau.
Yes, we get CBC through Kamloops, and I would like to know why, how come the station in Kamloops can run a mail order house? They've got 10 minutes of commercials going that I'm sure that it's free time.
Well, it's a CBC affiliate in Kamloops, as I understand, and they will run the normal commercial content. I don't know anything about a mail order house.
They're running their own business.
Well, I'm sorry, ma'am.
I'm not familiar with that. I'm sorry.
If you think it's wrong, don't write to me. Write to Pierre Juneau or the CRTC. Go ahead, please. Hello, you're next.
Not me.
That's you. You're next.
Oh, Mr. Juneau.
Yeah.
Good morning.
I read in an old book by, I believe, Pierre Valliere, a reference which said you are, literally translated, in the orbit of the Trilateral Commission Council on Foreign Relations, and I couldn't tell whether that meant you were a member or not. Could you please confirm or deny?
I know very little about the Trilateral Commission except what I've read in the press. I think I attended once a meeting organized by the Canadian participants in the Trilateral, but there were all kinds of other people there, including Richard Gwynn, well-known.
I'm quite sure that we won't send you to jail for that.
Yeah.
Go ahead, please, to Pierre Juneau.
Good morning.
Morning.
I'd like to know what the possibilities would be of getting particularly opera and symphony shows on an FM simulcast.
FM simulcast with television on CBC.
Yeah, it's a good idea. I don't know how much we're doing of it now. I know that it presents a very much better sound. It's a good idea. I don't know whether we can do it more or not.
Go ahead, please. Hello.
Hello.
That's you.
Me?
Yep.
Yes, I wanted to mention to Mr. Juneau, it's a similar question to what a previous speaker mentioned, and that is that I watched the CBC for many years. In the last year or two, I've swung over to CTV because the CBC news is strongly tainted to the left. And I don't know if this is because of what the previous caller mentioned or whether it's Mr. Trudeau's influence. But if you listen to the 6 o'clock news, you'll find it strongly tainted to the left. So I think that should be investigated and rectified. Go along like Jack Webster. I don't know Jack's political affiliation because he is so fair on all his reporting.
Oh, I'm perfect.
I can see that.
Yeah, go.
Well, I think, as I said to the previous caller, people have to express their views, and it'll help the CBC to be as fair as it should be.
But he should write to you.
Yes, write to me, sure.
From Pine Point in the Northwest Territories. Go ahead to Pierre Juneau, please.
Yes, Mr. Juneau, I'd like to know why the CBC is spending so much money trying to develop new Canadian talent when there's so many Canadians who have gone abroad where they have got jobs. I think of William Shatner, Christopher Plummer, and these actors, and why they are not considered now if they make a motion picture in the United States or Britain, why that is not considered sufficient Canadian talent. We see in the Northwest Territories a considerable amount of films with these actors, but they're just not. We see them on American channels, and they're not considered Canadian content.
Well, let me put it in a question like this to Mr. Juneau. Does the CBC have the policy it was alleged to have previously, that it will not tolerate a star, and they will not build anyone up really to national prominence, would rather see them go elsewhere and become a, quote, star?
No, I don't think so. If you're talking, let's stay with drama. I think that on the information side, obviously CBC does a lot to develop stars. Barbara Frum, Knowlton Nash, etc., etc. Sometimes it's being criticized for keeping the same people on the air all the time, so you can't have it both ways. In the field of drama that you're referring to, I think that many of those Canadians who have succeeded abroad are now coming back to Canada to take part in important productions, co-productions with the US or with Europe. Some of the film directors like Norman Jewison, who was very successful in Hollywood, is now back in Canada making films out of Canada. So yes, you're right, and we will be making use, I think, and independent producers will be making use of people like that, because if you want programs that have a certain popularity with the public and popularity abroad, you've got to have stars.
In the final analysis, though, would you tell me, Mr. Juneau, that you must have public subsidy? CBC, could it survive without subsidy?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Unless we became a strictly commercial operation, and then what would we provide that is not provided already by CTV, for instance?
And you still think it's possible in the long haul to, against all this open sky satellite cable competition, to present to Canadians who want to see it, the Canadian...
We have no choice, do we?
Otherwise?
Otherwise, I think that a country without a strong broadcasting system where it can hear itself, I think runs a very big risk of losing its personality.
And its existence.
And its existence.
My thanks to Pierre Trudeau. Next, Gord Thomson.
That was a bad slip.
That was, my subconscious was showing. My thanks to Pierre Juneau. Seen him lately?
No, I don't see him very much.
No interference politically at all?
No, I don't think so.
My thanks to Pierre Juneau. I'll be back with the president of Esso Petroleum after the break. Gord Thomson doesn't get anything in the way of public money to run his operation. Gets accelerated write-offs here and there. He is the president of Esso Canada, but particularly which division of this giant Esso do you run?
The refining and marketing side of the business.
So you're the guy that gets the oil from somewhere, mixes it into the various fuels, and sells it at your self-service pumps.
That's correct.
How much money did you make last year, Mr. Thomson?
I can't give you the segmented returns for Esso Petroleum because they haven't been released, and you wouldn't want me to get in trouble with the Securities and Exchange people.
No.
But we made a lot less than we made the previous year, let me tell you. And Imperial Oil, in total, made $289 million last year, down 40% from the previous year.
So that's Imperial Esso?
Yes, the whole company.
$300 million?
Yes.
Compared to your investment?
Yes.
So it really is a bagatelle?
A bagatelle?
Bagatelle, small amount.
It's a small amount compared with the $6 billion of investment that we have, yes.
Now, even though you run the refinery and the servicing, can you tell me why this morning the price of a barrel of oil has plummeted down to what's believed to be about $29.50 a barrel, but our gas prices are now at over $2 a gallon? As these prices come down, aren't our prices supposed to come down too?
We really don't know, Jack. You know, we're still increasing prices in Canada up to the levels that world prices were. or a fraction of those levels, depending upon the kind of oil.
Right.
What will take place now, the rumored reduction is $5 a barrel U.S. Really, we don't have mechanisms in place at this point in time to flow that through into the Canadian marketplace. We really don't know what is going to happen.
Is it a fact that we are hanged by the Alberta-Ottawa Agreement on the National Energy Policy?
That agreement is certainly in place. It will have to be seen whether it's going to be changed.
In other words, there's no provision for the prices to come down yet. That would be in the hands of the Ottawa government if it decided not to implement the next scheduled increase.
Well, my own reading of the document is that for old oil, there doesn't appear to be a mechanism. But who knows what will result in the next little while.
It must be just as annoying to you as to us, the fact that prices are going down, but the price at the pump keeps going up.
Well, certainly our customers don't like it very much, and they keep telling us that they don't like it. It is a little annoying, if you want to call it that. But it's important to recognize that those prices are where they are today, based on a slow and gradual increase that the governments of this country agreed upon. You know, we could have had those high prices several years ago, but we didn't have them. So in that respect, the Canadian customers have had a bargain for a few years.
Yeah, for a number of years we were protected from the impact of world prices. I think that should generally be recognized. But what about specific prices on your side? It seems to me that there was only about a 2-cent difference between leaded and unleaded gas when it was first introduced along with a catalytic converter, and now it's 10 cents of a difference between leaded and unleaded.
The difference today
is
yeah, well, it's 1.8 cents a liter today, the posted tank wagon difference. The initial differences, Jack, were based, I think, on a low-lead gasoline, not a lead-free gasoline. The first of these new gasolines that came in the mid-'70s were low-lead, not lead-free.
Low-lead. So to produce the truly unleaded gas seems to cost about 1.8 cents a litre.
That's the difference in price. That's right.
Do we really need unleaded gas? In other words, would you people in the oil industry, speaking broadly, like to dump the unleaded gas and go back to leaded gas?
Jack, you know, there's a tremendous weight of health evidence that indicates that lead is a poison.
Right.
What we don't know is what concentration can be permitted. You know, there's some recent studies that have just been released on this matter, and they're really good studies, and there's some new data coming in that suggests that maybe we'll have to go a little lower than we are now. But we're a way lower today than we were 10 years ago.
You mean the unleaded might have to be purified even more?
Well, not the unleaded, but the leaded gasolines, we may have to lower the specification there. But you know, we have about half the lead emissions today that we had in 1972. So we've come a long way.
And if we want that, we've got to pay the price for taking the lead out, the lead out. We've got to get that lead out of our gas.
Because lead is the lowest cost way we know of making octane in motor gasoline.
As a guy in the oil industry, we were promised self-sufficiency 1,000 years ago. Are we anywhere closer to Canadian self-sufficiency than we were at the beginning of all this panic?
Well, you know, it's really interesting. When all of this began in the 70s, we were importing 500,000 or 600,000 barrels a day of oil into this country.
Right.
But with conservation and with the substitution of more natural gas and electricity, we're only importing about 200,000 barrels a day today. So the programs seem to be working. We're not self-sufficient yet, and we need more energy supply development to get there, but we've closed the gap.
But the greater the recession, the less the use of gas.
The recession has had an impact, no doubt. But most importantly, the smaller cars, the change to use natural gas instead of home fuels, heating fuels, using electricity, the more efficient airplanes, all of that's had a substantial impact.
Are any of your stations going to go to the McGear business of natural gas?
We're looking at it.
You're looking at it?
Yes.
Petro-Canada are the only ones that are...
I believe there are two, Petro-Canada and Mohawk.
Yeah, maybe, I think they've got one each at the moment.
Yeah, we're looking at a test situation, Jack, and if there are consumers out there who need the fuels, Esso will be there to sell it to them.
Like the early days of diesel when you had to go looking for a diesel station.
Yeah, now you can find it
almost everywhere.
Almost everywhere.
Self-service is proceeding to your satisfaction, is it? Would you like to see every gas station in the country on self-service?
No, I wouldn't. I think there are still a lot of consumers out there who want to get their windows wiped and they want to get their oil checked and other mechanical checks made on their cars. I don't see self-service disappearing completely, but there may well be fewer full-serve stations available in the future. That's what the consumers seem to want.
Yeah. Now, one other question about Beaufort Sea. That's Imperial, isn't it?
We are up there along with some others.
With the present price of a barrel of oil going way down, will we ever see the oil from the Beaufort?
Well, I hope so, because this country really needs that oil. It's
But
a
not
question
at that
of
price.
Well, it's a question of price and the revenue sharing arrangements. And you know, there are no revenue sharing arrangements cemented in place today for Beaufort oil. So we really don't know what the economic circumstances might be for that kind of production.
Okay. Your questions to Gord Thomson, President of Esso Canada, after the break. What are you doing to help the Canadian Amateur Swimming Association?
Jack, we're their major corporate sponsor. We've donated about $2 million to the Swimming Association in the last 6 or 7 years. We're trying to help them develop Canada's athletes. They think that they can become the best in the world for the 1984 Winter Olympics. I'm here today, frankly, to try and attract some other corporate sponsors, because Imperial Oil and others can't do it alone.
So how much money are you going to raise from corporate sponsors if you're lucky?
If we're lucky, maybe another $100,000 or $150,000.
Pretty tough these days.
Oh, it's really tough.
When
and
our
a lot
biggest
of people are
lumber
hurting.
people are selling their buildings to put some cash in the kitty to pay the current bills.
It is really tough, and we recognize that. But, you know, this is, I think, a tremendous opportunity for people in this country to rally around some kids who really are trying hard. There's a film, not on your network, I'm afraid, but a special on the CBC on Wednesday night called The Fast and the Furious. And I think that's just a tremendous show. I've seen it. It shows the pain and the agony and the thrill of swimming in a way that's never been shown before. We're using that film as a way of telling corporate sponsors.
So you're going to hit people over the head for their company checkbooks?
Going to try a little bit, yes.
Fair enough. Go ahead to Gord Thomson of Esso.
Yeah, good morning, Mr. Webster and Mr. Thompson.
Morning.
Good morning.
Mr. Thompson, with all the money you people are investing in different energy sources to replace oil and stuff in the future, what is being done? I read it in a Science Digest not too long ago about the milkweed production and conversion into turning the saps, etc., from milkweed into something you can put in your car.
Okay, milkweed, methane, pig manure, whatever, is no longer needed when oil gets cheaper, am I correct?
Oh, it's needed because we're going to run out of oil someday. Our company is looking at things like the manufacture of alcohols from wood. You know, there's a lot of poplar trees in this country. And,
ethanol.
Ethanol. That might be something that we want to get into in the future. There's a lot of these kinds of things that we have to look into and do research on.
Yeah, during the war in Britain, they ran a hell of a lot of trucks on little bags of methane from pig manure.
Yes.
But it's not really practical. Like solar power is out the window now to begin. I mean, for instant use.
For motive car use, I think it is.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Yeah, we were just on a, is that me?
That's you, yes.
Yeah. We're just on a trip to about 7 different states in the United States of America, and what I really noticed is something I've never seen before. And I think Imperial, as a leader in Canada, should go for it.
What's that?
Everywhere we went, if you paid by the credit card, it was $1.14 to $1.29 a gallon. On your Visa, MasterCard, American Express, etc. If you paid cash, you were saving anywhere from 4 to 19 cents a gallon. Now, if Imperial really wants to be such a good corporate image, why in God's name don't they do it in Canada?
Just give us a few months to study the situation. We might be doing something in that regard.
You mean
a few months, but what you've already done, you're saying you want to do all these things, and you've got all these viewers watching you. You get charged by Visa and American.
Okay, hold on a second. Are you planning a system whereby Canadian customers will get their gas cheaper for cash?
Jack, we're looking at it, but it takes a lot of time to make a change like that.
But are you considering it seriously?
Yes.
Seriously consider gas cheaper for cash? How much a gallon, do you know?
I can't tell you, Jack.
Okay, we'll nag him in the fall. Okay, caller? Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Mr. Thompson.
Good morning.
Back in 1939, when I bought my first car, it used to be that leaded gasoline cost you approximately 5 cents a gallon more than unleaded because they had to bring the additive up from the States, from the Tetraethyl Corporation, I believe it was. Now, they're charging approximately 9 or 10 cents a gallon more to leave the lead out. Is there actually any lead in the gas as it comes out of the refinery before any additives are put in? Or is it just a situation where they're now charging for where it brings the most money?
Lead is only put in the gasolines if they're leaded gasolines. But the fuels you were buying in 1939 were very much lower octane fuels than you're getting today. And so to increase the octane, they put lead in, beginning of, I guess, in the 20s. But now what we're having to do is manufacture replacement octane by high-intensity refining processes. That's why the cost for lead-free today is more.
To put the octane up.
To put the octane
He had a nice little theory that you got the gas without the lead and that you added lead.
No, the lead is added to bring the octane up. The gas without the lead is low. If you don't put lead in, you've got to manufacture it in a different way to get the octane up.
I get it. He's got an explanation for that, old guy. Go ahead, please.
Hello.
Yes.
Yeah, I'd like to ask your caller what his views are on these 200-mile-an-hour carburetors that GM and other companies have been buying the patents for and putting away for years to come. And I'd like to also ask him why his people aren't doing anything about the environment. We can't live on fossil fuels forever. We're removing all the oxygen from the planet, and we're leaving carbon monoxide and other pollutants in its place. And I don't think the fuel companies really give a damn about the little people. They're looking to make money today and get away and not worry about their grandchildren and the future life on this planet. And I wish they'd be more responsible and quit whitewashing people and making the bucks on the side. It seems that the energy situation is the crux of all our problems. Extra cost in transportation, fuel, heating is what's ruining the economic situation in our country. And I just wish people would do something about it. And I wish people such as him would be more vocal and down to earth. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's start with the environmental issue. We're doing everything as quickly as we can in response to health studies. We're learning a lot more about what needs to be done. And I believe that the petroleum industry can stand against any other group on its record.
You can't hardly smell the refineries in Burnaby anymore.
That's
right.
right.
There was a time when they used to stink out the whole of this part of the world.
Yeah.
So you've cleaned up the refineries?
Yes, we have.
And it's not your intention to steal all our air, is it?
I sure hope not. I breathe it too.
Go ahead from Sardis.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Thompson.
Good morning.
Yes, earlier in the program, Mr. Webster mentioned methane and as an alternative fuel, and you said that you were thinking about it. Now, my question is really, what is there to think about? Because if methane goes into the gas stations across Canada, bang, that's the fuel crisis solved. No more imports of oil other than for plastics and industrial uses. We have a taxi company in Vancouver that's done an excellent job, and it's half the price. I mean, you know, people in the homes are told to get rid of oil and go into natural gas, and it's worked for so many people. I mean, you know, a company like yours, I can't see why you're not into that. You're not saying to the oil-rich countries, we don't need you, we need you for plastics, but we don't need you for other things. We can use Alberta oil for the industrial uses. And people's cars are no oil as a substance is eliminated in the automobile. Now, is that something that takes a great deal of soul-searching and sort of thinking about, or can't it be done within 3 to 6 months?
It takes about 9 months to invest in the compression facilities and the dispensing facilities required for compressed natural gas at a cost of between $300,000 and $400,000 per service station, more than the cost of the whole rest of the service station almost. So it is not a decision one takes lightly. One would like to have a growing market and be sure that that market is there before you spend that kind of money. I think that's prudent management. We hope to do some tests, make sure the market is there. You know, we're a pretty conservative company, but I can tell you that if the market's there, we'll be there to serve it.
Good, and I wish you well in your campaign to raise some money from corporate donors for the Canadian Amateur Swimming Association.
Thank you, Jack.
My thanks to Gord Thomson of Esso, Canada. Next, we're going to talk to Leonard Schroeter on Soviet dissidents. Come on, whip yourself into a frenzy, Webster. There are places outside of BC. After the break. One of the great international problems is how dissidents are treated in the USSR. And here I've got Leonard Schroeter from Seattle, and he's up here for a demonstration on the dissident Anatoly Shcharansky. You're going to have to whip me into a frenzy on this one. I've paid no attention, haven't been listening, so you tell me why I should be listening and what the hell's going on.
Okay. We've had Mr. Juneau, we've had Mr. Thomson. They talk about economics. They talk about the pragmatics of policy, as indeed they have to. I want to talk about problems of conscience, which
our consciences don't work very well these days. We're concerned only with the recession, how we're going to live next winter, what the Americans are going to do, because we're a tail of the Yankee dog economically. So you whip me into a frenzy, and I'll try and be serious about it.
What we're doing today is we're having a demonstration, a rally about a man by the name of Anatoly Shcharansky.
Right.
Shcharansky is a guy who achieved some prominence about 6 years ago when he was arrested in the Soviet Union on a lot of different charges. But basically his crime was that, first of all, he was a Soviet Jew who was trying to get the hell out of the Soviet Union. Secondly, he was a human rights activist who said that when the Soviet Union signed the Helsinki Accord, presumably they should have meant it. Third, he was a man who had been an activist in a lot of ways. He had the unmitigated nerve, for example, to take BBC reporters around Moscow and give them a conducted tour of dissidents in the Soviet Union. And you know, that's not polite in Moscow. And for all of these things he was arrested. None of them, of course, should be violations of law in any civilized society. And in addition to that, they called him a CIA agent, which even got the President of the United States to get up and say, no way. And ever since that time, we've been trying to get Shcharansky out of prison. He's been rotting away in a prison ever since. And Shcharansky, in a sense, symbolizes for people all over the world a man who was an activist who spoke for conscience and for human rights and human freedom. Now, the way all this got started in Vancouver was there was a young rabbi by the name of Daniel Siegel, who's the Jewish chaplain at Simon Fraser and UBC, who went on a fast himself to call attention to the fact that this is an important issue for all people. So today there's an interfaith rally at Robson Square at 4 o'clock that we hope everybody will come to make a statement about human rights and its importance in Canada and in the world, and to hope that that kind of pressure will mean something in terms of Shcharansky.
Well, the first big one, I suppose, the first big dissident, was that Solzhenitsyn?
Well, Solzhenitsyn was one of the big dissidents, Sakharov, and there are a whole host of others.
The difference being nowadays, in compared to the times of Stalin and company, is that they don't automatically put down dissidents.
No, they automatically do put down dissidents.
I mean,
they don't automatically shoot them.
That's what I mean. They don't automatically kill them like they did in the days of the Stalin purges.
That's right.
Now they put them into psychiatric hospitals and abuse them mentally. Is that correct?
That's correct, and they also put them in the gulag, in prison camps, or in simply prisons in solitaire like they do with Shcharansky.
Now, is it Amnesty International that's doing this particular protest?
Amnesty International is one of the groups that's doing the protest, along with Canadian Jewish Congress, a lot of the church groups, Catholic, Anglican,
a number of dissidents have been released by pressure from the West. Is it possible to get Anatoly Shcharansky out? Is it possible?
Yeah, anything is possible. What happens is a product of the Soviet regime's response to pressures in the West, if those pressures are really meaningful, and if, in pragmatic, non-ideologic terms for the Soviet Union, it seems like there's more pressure than there
Under
can take.
Carter's regime in the United States, there was a great pressure for the migration of Soviet Jewry to Israel and other places. Does Reagan not really take any interest in this kind of human rights whatsoever?
Yeah, I don't think Reagan takes any interest in any human rights in the United States, in the Soviet Union, or anything else. I think he has lip service to it.
What about Pierre Trudeau, who went over to the Soviet Union? I was dealing with them recently on quite a generous and friendly basis. Do you regard him as a friend of those who support freedom in the Soviet Union?
It's harder for me to comment because I know less.
Feel free.
Because I know less, that's all. I can comment with impunity about Mr. Reagan because I think he's a terrible man. As far as Trudeau, I know less, but I would say this generally, that conscience rarely comes from the heads of governments. It comes from people. The heads of governments make pragmatic decisions like Imperial Oil does, and maybe even like CBC does. You know? I suspect that pragmatism dictates sometimes impractical solutions ultimately. If you want to talk what's pragmatic and what isn't, I think Daniel Siegel may be as pragmatic as, let's say, Gandhi. Was Gandhi pragmatic? How important is a statement of conscience in the world? To what extent does conscience matter? To what extent do human rights matter? Well, we've been seeing a marvelous movie that has reminded us that a man like Gandhi, because he was an ethical human being who acted ethically and acted bravely, made a difference.
Unfortunately, he died.
Yeah, well, we all do.
The moment he died, I think it was 12 million of his fellow inhabitants of the Indian subcontinent slaughtered each other.
Right.
Take away Gandhi and God knows.
Yeah, you know, it makes the point, Jack, and I think it's a basic point, is that human rights aren't won in a day or maybe ever. It's the fight that's important. You've got to keep fighting for human rights wherever they're violated, whether it's in Canada or the United States or the Soviet Union or South Africa, because unless you do that, one, you deny your own humanity, and two, if you don't do it, it's worse. Now, what would have been worse in India? I don't know. You know, I can't speak to the pragmatism, but I can speak to the fact that Gandhi made a difference in the world. Shcharansky's make a difference in the world. Sakharov's make a difference in the world. And unless people like you and I, you and me, whatever it is, unless we, let's not figure that one out. That will take us the rest of the program. But unless people like us speak out of our own conscience, you know, what hope is there?
Nothing. You and I is, by the way.
Okay, good.
You and me.
I did it right the first time.
Okay, we're going to take some phone calls on your conscience,
all right.
Shcharansky, and other civil rights problems about which many of us do not fight long enough, not loud enough, not often enough. For instance, we've got a new Charter of Rights, American style, and it's gonna be a disaster. After the break. I want to ask Leonard Schroeter again about migration to Israel by the Soviet Jewry. Is it allowed or not at the moment?
At the moment, it is allowed technically, but it's so minimal that it's virtually non-existent. It's down to a couple thousand a year. From 1971 to the present, there have been almost 250,000 Jews who've gotten out. But the problem is that the Soviet regime has really clamped down tremendously in all kinds of dissent, and particularly on immigration.
Well, if you're running a dictatorship, you've got to clamp down on dissent or you lose your clout, don't you?
Sure. That's exactly right, and that's what we scream about.
That's a pragmatic thing, but the Soviet Union is still capable of being embarrassed in international forums.
Constantly embarrassed.
But capable of being embarrassed.
Yeah, they are embarrassed from time to time, and sometimes it matters.
Go ahead, please. What are you?
Yes, hello.
Yeah, speak up.
My question is one I hope won't be misunderstood. I'm sure that in the Soviet Union and in the Soviet bloc there are millions of people who want to get out. Why is it that one hears constantly about the Jewish desire to get out? And
that's a very good question. It's not misunderstood. There are millions and millions and millions of people who want to get out. And it's a complicated question, but certainly Ukrainians want to get out, believers want to get out, Latvians want to get out, and just simply people who believe in freedom want to get out, and it's hard for some of them to get out. Now, there are two reasons probably why we hear more about Jews who want to get out. The first reason is that from the viewpoint of the Soviet Union historically, and in recent years, there were some of their own attitudes may have been that they just as soon get rid of Jews for a lot of reasons, and they had a good excuse about Jews, that Jews were essentially traitors who wanted to go to Israel anyway, so get the hell rid of them. Ukrainians, it's a little harder to say that about, you see.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So Jews for a while had a somewhat easier time to get out. But the second reason, I think, is because there was a much clearer statement of conscience by the part of Jews all over the world on behalf of Jews and others on behalf of Jews, and because there was a country, Israel, that really fought very hard to get them out.
And prepared to take them.
And prepared to take
Go
them.
ahead, please.
Good morning. I just wanted to make a point on the matter of conscience and the raising of the awareness level of our people concerning the situation in Russia just now. But I'm of the belief that the system exists over there because the people allow it to exist. And even Stalin is even regarded by many Russians as having the image of a strong leader, in spite of his actions of the past. And I believe that we have enough problems in our own country of human rights and injustices. For the record, last night is a good example that we should allow the Russians to look after their problems in their way, and we can look after ours over here.
Okay.
Well, it's certainly difficult to know what public opinion in Russia is, since we don't have public opinion polls. There's an enormous amount of indication that very large numbers of people in the Soviet Union care very deeply and do want to get out and do protest in various ways, but they wind up in prisons and they wind up dead. As far as paying attention to other countries, there are many people who believe, as I do, that human rights are fairly indivisible. I don't think we'll live in a peaceful world ever until nations respect individual values.
Go ahead from Falkland, BC.
Hello.
Hello.
We got relatives still living in Russia, you know. But what I'd like to point out is that
Go on.
all these that person he seemed to be quite started quite a controversy in Russia. I think if you want to get out of there, you shouldn't try to rock the boat, as it were, too much.
Well, I think it's just the opposite. If you want to get out, you have to rock the boat. The only way anybody ever got out was by rocking the boat, and by rocking the boat as noisily and publicly as they can. You know.
Go ahead from Kitimat.
Yeah, good morning, Jack.
Morning.
Yeah, I'd like to talk to this fellow talking about rights in other countries. You know, they should clean up the Human Rights Act in this country first before they start talking about other countries.
I'm
getting a little fed up with these people sitting over here mouthing off. They want to do something about it. Why don't they go over there and do it?
Well, I don't really understand the question, but I think you brighten the corner where you are, and that may include here or in Seattle or any other place. If you don't care about people, you don't care about them in Vancouver, and you don't care about them in Seattle, and you don't care about them in the Soviet Union or any other place.
What's your problem here, caller?
Yeah, well, you got a police force here just as bad as any Gestapo unit they ever had in Germany.
Come off it. Don't be stupid.
Well, that's what you don't know. You should come out and tell the truth what was on in this country.
I know perfectly well what happens with the police every now and again. Injustices are committed, people will get beaten up, there'll be all kinds of stupid things done, but it ain't exactly like the Gestapo.
Oh, they're just as bad. They do it behind closed
Oh,
doors.
I'm sure they do. Run their own little private gas chambers. That's the kind of thing that gets me right on the raw.
Okay.
Go ahead, please.
Hello?
Yes.
I'd just like him to speak on civil rights in Lebanon.
I think that there are severe, horrible problems of civil rights in Lebanon, and it's obvious that they're there. And I don't think that we can be less concerned about them in Lebanon than we are in any other place.
He's taking a jab at, the Israeli army and its apparent non-activity during the massacres.
Yeah, well, I mean, if he's asking me to defend that, I'm not prepared to do that any more than I'm prepared to defend any other atrocities.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, I'd like to say to you, Jack, that the fact that the police are bringing the administration of justice into disrepute, that is violating people's rights and not respecting the law, is the cause of crime here.
Let me say I'm perfectly willing to concede that the police here are somewhat less than perfect, and that whatever they can, they will dig and bury their own skeletons, their own little closets. It's the stupid references to them as a Gestapo. If you knew what the Gestapo was, you might say they're an arrogant bunch of stinkers who look after their own and don't administer justice properly, and that I'll accept in specific cases. But Gestapo, no. Next call. Go ahead, please.
Hello.
That's you, sir.
Yes.
I mean,
what about the human rights for the people in the West Bank of Palestine?
Obviously, they're being seriously violated. Obviously, you have to protest about it. I do.
And obviously, the Arab in Israel has always been a second-class citizen of some kind. There's no argument about that. He's not here speaking for the state of Israel. He's speaking here as a man with a distinguished career in the American Civil Liberties Union, etc., 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 about the Russian problem. Go ahead from Vernon.
Yeah, I'd like to ask the guest a question regarding to Israel.
Yes.
Why should the Soviet Union allow Jews to go to Israel when Israel is an enemy of the Soviet Union and they would go to Israel and be used as cannon fodder for American and Israeli imperialism.
The reason that they should allow them to go to Israel or to Canada, which is where an awful lot of them are now coming, or to the United States where a great many are now coming, is because there's a basic Declaration of Human Rights that says that all countries must permit people to leave their own country if they choose. And that's the reason why. And where they go, where Jews go when they leave the Soviet Union, isn't the concern of the Soviet Union.
And when it comes to protesters, Israel holds the world's championship for protesting. After the Shatala massacres, I think there were 500,000 Israelis out in the streets in Tel Aviv kicking the devil out of their own military command, which is more than you could get in this country.
And a commission of inquiry that has essentially indicted the leadership of the country.
Including...
And that's the point, incidentally, about the comments about Canada or the United States. Of course there are abuses in all of these countries, but we live in societies of rule of law, essentially. We have the right to protest, which people in the Soviet Union don't. We have to be the voice for the people who can't protest in their own countries. We can protest in ours, and some of us do, just as loudly as we do about what happens in other countries. But you can't have double standards about this, baby.
Go ahead, please. Go ahead.
Okay. Nobody wants to go ahead.
Are you there? You're next up. Go ahead, please.
Hello?
Yes. That's you.
Hello?
Yes.
Good morning. I'd like to commend the man there on what he's doing for civil rights. It seems maybe kind of futile to some people, but it's about the only way, I guess, that anything can be brought to attention of the injustices being done. But I'd like to know, what do they plan on doing there besides marching? I believe praying probably is the only answer to it that I see. Because when you look at El Salvador and those countries in Latin America, maybe for conscience sake, the governments such as the U.S. and the others that are intervening in there, maybe they feel that they're doing right there. When I look at it, I don't see it that way. I believe that their rights are being taken away by the intervention that's there. I wonder if you could reply on this.
Yeah, well, praying's fine, and I have no objection to it, and demonstrating's fine. I don't have any objection to that. The main thing that people have to do is they have to speak out, and they have to speak out by going to Robson Square at 4 o'clock today. As far as Central America is concerned, obviously it's a mess. And obviously American participation isn't all that some of us want. And we yell about it.
And there might be an invasion there soon.
Hope not.
Leonard Schroeter from Seattle. I'll be back after the break.